are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is the case of Janette Roberson. Now, this is a small town and a sweet girl and a case that has never been solved. What really happened to Janette that afternoon? By the way, I post so much content like this, so if it's something you're interested in, I would so appreciate your support by subscribing down below. Now let's get back to this story. So it was 1983 in Reed City, Michigan, and 27-year-old Janette Roberson had just recently moved to this city. She had moved with her family, which consisted of her husband Alvin and her 2 children, and they had just recently uprooted from Georgia. Now, at this time, Janette had gotten a job at a pet department store. It was kind of more of a store with lots of different things in it, but in the basement there was a pet department, and this is where Janette thrived. This store was called Gamble's, and she was basically perfect for this job. Janette was said to be the type of girl who was insanely kind to everyone she would meet. In fact, she was just the type that was so warm and fuzzy, and she was not only beautiful, but she was patient and gentle and just the sweetest person ever. And one of her biggest passions in life was animals and children, and she kind of treated them the same, and even once nursed a bird that was kind of hurt back to health. And this meant that her job was very important to her, whether she was a mother or a worker at the store, and whether she was at home taking care of her kids or whether she was taking care of an animal, it was equally as important to her. Janette was born October 25th of 1955 to Ralph and Miriam Fisher, and when she was just 16 years old, she actually met and married Alvin Roberson, and they soon had 2 children together, Jennifer, who was 9, and Kelvin, who was 8. Now, when they decided to go ahead and move to Reed City from Georgia, the kids were, of course, at the age to go to school, and Janette had some time on her hands, and that's why she decided to get this job. They had originally moved to Reed City because Janette's mother had lived there as well and worked as the city clerk. Gamble's was located on the main road in town with a whole bunch of other businesses, kind of like a downtown shopping area. And on the afternoon of January 19th, 1983, Janette was working at the Gamble's store when a man named Gene Johnson walked in. It was about 11:30 a.m. and he walked in, and Janette greeted him right off the bat, and he kind of said, "Where is everybody else?" because she was the only one in the store, and she said, "Oh, they're unloading the truck that just came in with the supplies," and asked him if he needed anything. And he said, "Oh, you know, I know the store probably better than you," because she had just started working there, and he apparently was a longtime customer, and he just kind of joked, and she said, "Oh, okay, well, I'll leave you be then," and she decided to head down to check on the animals in the basement while he finished up. He was there for about 15 minutes before leaving, and then Janette would leave on a break at around noon, saying that she needed to go pick up her children from school. Janette dropped them off at a babysitter and headed back into her job because her break was over. And then at around 3:30, a local couple who worked at the school district came into the store, and they noticed that the workers were all whispering, and they were saying things like, "Well, her coat is here." And then one of the managers or coworkers named Angie headed downstairs to go check on Janette and ran back upstairs not too long after with the look that she had just seen a ghost. At around 4 p.m., everyone in the Gamble's store was ushered outside, and the doors were closed, and the police were called. 6 minutes later, this call to 911 would be made, and the EMTs would get there in 2 minutes because it was such a small town that they just drove a little while and they were there. It was very quick and easy, except for they didn't necessarily think anything of it being as bad as it was. In fact, they were rushing because they had been told by the dispatcher that it was a heart attack in progress. And so, of course, they were rushing to save a life. The dispatcher said this because they didn't want the locals in the area who had a police scanner to show up and flock at the scene and just cause an even bigger ordeal. And so they just kind of said, oh, it's a heart attack, because nobody really, rushes to see that. And so the EMTs got there and were expecting a heart attack in progress. But in fact, that was the farthest from the truth. They would walk into this 10 by 10 pet supplies room and find Jeannette lying on the floor in the pool of her own blood. She was underneath a rack of animal cages just beyond the door, and she wasn't quite cold, but she wasn't super warm either, leading them to believe that she hadn't been murdered too long before they got there. And they also didn't notice at first, but there was a pool of blood right in front of the back door in the basement. Unfortunately, this pool of blood was stepped in as the EMTs ran in to help because, like I said, they were wanting to save a life. They didn't realize that somebody was already deceased. And this is why local nurses walking by would rush in and contaminate even more evidence, thinking, oh, I can help. If anybody needs help, I'm here, and would just kind of run in on this crime scene, disturbing even more of the crime scene. Her body was taken for an autopsy while her friends and family were informed of her death, and allegedly when they went to tell her husband Alvin, he was at home with the kids and he burst into tears. Now, what they found in her autopsy was that she had been beaten with several different blunt objects, as well as stabbed multiple times and sexually assaulted. However, apparently there was so much of her autopsy that was kept from the public because it was so gruesome that they feared the public wouldn't be able to stomach it. Now, of course, they were looking for witnesses who were in this store that day. They could have possibly been suspects. They could have possibly seen someone. The only problem was they were kicked out immediately after finding her body and dispersed. So they didn't know who was there. They didn't know how to track them. Their only hope was that it was a small town and people knew who they were and could track them for them. But other than that, they had no idea who all was there. They only knew that Jeannette was last seen by a coworker at about 1:30 that afternoon. Then a witness named Carl Johnson said that around 10 to 11 that morning, so before Jean even came in, he was there trying to give Jeannette some gerbils. They were baby gerbils of a mama gerbil that Jeannette had given him, and Jeannette had told him, if this gerbil has babies, you can always bring it back to me and I can handle them. And so that's what Carl was doing there, but he waited about 15 minutes in the basement where he knew Jeannette worked, and she never came. And so eventually he went back up to the manager and said, do you know when Jeannette will be back? I'm kind of here waiting for her. And the manager said, well, her husband has been here several times today. Maybe she went home with him. The owner of Gambles very specifically believed that Alvin had been the one to murder Jeannette because it wasn't like him to always be at the store so often. In fact, not at all. However, Jeannette's sister said that he could not have done it, that he was so heartbroken over this and that it just wasn't possible. And Alvin was quickly ruled out of having anything to do with this investigation. There was a man that had been at Gambles the day prior to her murder and was leaving town the day that she was murdered. And so police actually stopped a bus he was on that was 12 miles south of Reed City, and they got him off. They interrogated him only to find out that he probably didn't have anything to do with it, and they let him go. Police then questioned men at the Meadowview Apartments, which was also where the Robersons lived, and this was because Carl had told police that one of the men had often gone into Gambles and was very fond of Jeannette. Jeannette was very helpful and gentle and caring with this man, and he was kind of a little on the slower side, and she was very patient with him. And Carl feared that this man had become obsessed with her and possibly took her life, maybe because she didn't want anything more with him, but Carl just feared that he had something to do with it. However, all of these men were interviewed several times over the years and nothing came of it. A local newspaper called The Pioneer claimed that there were two women at the Gambles store that afternoon that were buying fish equipment and that the police were looking for. They said in there they weren't necessarily suspects, but but they just wanted to hear what they had seen or heard in case it led to a clue to who had done this, except for the two women were never identified in this small town. And I mean, that's really strange. If they were from the small town, you'd think somebody would recognize two women together and know who they were. But nobody came forward, and neither did these women. Another possible witness was questioned in Jeannette's murder, and this was an officer named Ted Platts. And this was 3 days after Jeannette had been murdered that he was brought in for questioning because of his kind of erotic behavior before then. You see, 3 weeks before, he had gotten into a drunken fight at a bar and was just kind of not in his right mind in the weeks prior to her murder. And then 3 weeks after Jeannette was murdered, he was actually released from the force, and it was not released why that was. Eventually, the police came by all the possible witnesses that they could find that were in Gambles that day, one by one, excluding all of them, except for one man who witnesses had described, but they couldn't find him anywhere. He was said to be white with sandy blonde hair, wearing a blue jacket, at 5'9" and 170 pounds. And composite sketches were even made and sent out to the public to identify him, but he never was either. This man was thought to be in the store between 3 and 4 that afternoon, so possibly when Jeannette was murdered, and he had been seen buying pet supplies previously. Now, the only real suspect in this case had already been ruled out, her husband Alvin. And after he had been ruled out, he actually moved himself and his kids back to Georgia. Investigators said that they questioned him at his home, and Alvin worked at a Kaiser Unitest, and he would work from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. However, the week that his wife was murdered, he had actually been laid off from work. However, this interview between Alvin and the police has been kept from the public for whatever reason, and we don't know what he really said. You see, Alvin and Jeannette had been married for about 11 years, and Alvin had been said to be having a relationship with another woman. Allegedly, this woman he was having an affair with moved to Georgia with him, and they later got married after Jeannette's murder. A friend of Jeannette's later came forward saying that the night previous to her murder, Jeannette actually got 2 separate phone calls at her home where she would answer and no one would say anything, and then they would hang up. Now, this case is still unsolved today, and was it a cheating husband? Was it an obsessed customer? Was it a random killer or a serial killer? Now, something strange that I also found was that Carl Johnson's wife, the one who had wanted to give Jeannette these baby gerbils, his wife said that she was actually the one who found Jeannette's body, even though everyone else said that it was Jeannette's coworker, Angie. Now, was this wife just wanting to get some attention, saying, "Oh, I found the body," or was it possibly a cover-up for her husband? Carl did know Jeannette pretty well, and in fact, his wife was friends with Jeannette. And there was a certain degree of passion and anger in this killing that I think it would have to be someone who knew Jeannette. That's why I really don't think it's a random killer or a serial killer, although this level of aggression could show a serial killer. However, I think to know her every move, know she would be in the basement, is just kind of a very random fact that a serial killer would know. In 2014, after years of investigating and this being unsolved, they actually reopened the case and found that there was DNA found at the crime scene, except for it's never been matched to anyone just yet, but they do know that they still have it to test with the further investigations. Every year there is a Justice for Jeannette walk to keep her story alive, and her mother actually wrote a note to her killer, and it said, "To the murderer of Janette Roberson, Jeannette was a wonderful person, not only to her family or friends, to every person she came in contact with. She tried to help all creatures when they needed help, humans, birds, fish, plants, and animals alike. Her heart went out to everybody and everything. She is one of God's children. Yes, she had a heart as big as the universe itself. I loved her. Everybody loved her, except one person. you. Maybe you didn't know her, or then again maybe you did, but never think from the moment you committed the greatest sin against God and his children, you were condemned to a hell that will follow you every moment of your days. A hell that will increase in velocity until it will not let you live any longer on this earth. Our great God in heaven is the only one who will ever be able to help you now. Maybe, just maybe, he will find it in his heart to forgive you of your great sin and have mercy on your soul. Jeannette's soul is with her God. Her human body is lying in a coffin, and her husband and children are mourning for her just as I am. It will be hard for them to begin their lives again without their mother and wife. With God's help they will do it, however there is still a shadow hanging over them. You, Jeannette's murderer, my plea to you is to confess your sins and ask for God's mercy. By our great God, I appeal to any person who was in the gamble store in that dreadful day, or anyone having any information, no matter how small it may seem to you. Come forward, your little bit of information will help put the puzzle together. Please get in touch with the state police or the Reed City Police immediately, and may God bless you. So if you do have any information, please call the Reed City Police Department at 231-832-3743. And I do want to put in a special thanks to the Criminology podcast that I'll have linked down below. They did such amazing research on this, and without their information, there would not be a ton to talk about in this case because it's not widely discussed on the internet, unfortunately. So I do want to give a big thanks to them. But who do you think did it? Do you lean more towards her husband or possibly a random customer that knew her? I mean, she just seemed like such a sweet person. I can't imagine anyone who just came in contact with her a few times that would get so angry. I feel like it was either someone that she rejected after she was being so nice, and then they thought, oh, maybe she wants more, and she was like, oh no, I don't, I have a husband. Or possibly it was the husband that just wanted to get rid of her and marry this other woman. I don't want to immediately blame the husband just because it looks like the most likely, but I feel like it definitely could be, especially because he was in the store so much that day, but I really don't know. I'd love to hear your theories. As always, don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.